something chilling complete silence. No footsteps. No water running. Just the stillness of a place that should have been alive with noise. And Sarah? Gone. No screams. No struggle. No witnesses. A woman enslaved, trapped by chains, both seen and unseen, simply vanished. What happened in those shadowy early hours? And why has her story, like so many others, been left to rot in silence beneath the moss and mud of history? The sun hadn't yet risen over the Louisiana Bayou when the bathhouse keeper noticed if forgotten stories like Sarah's move you. Or if you're just as curious as we are to uncover the truth buried in time, hit like, subscribe, then share. Let's explore these untold histories together. The morning air was thick, clinging to the walls of the plantation like sweat on skin. It was the kind of heavy silence that felt unnatural, too still, too sudden. The bathhouse, usually alive with footsteps, whispers, and the sound of water sloshing in buckets, was dead quiet at first. No one thought much of it. Perhaps Sarah had started late. Perhaps there had been a delay. But as the sun began to rise and the shadows stretched across the muddy paths, someone noticed there was no fire lit beneath the water barrel. No towels laid out. No sign of life. The bathhouse was still locked from the outside, just as it had been the night before. But Sarah was gone. No broken windows. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. Just the locked door, a room that looked almost untouched, and a woman who had vanished into nothing. Imagine, for a moment, the fear that might have gripped her in those final moments, if there were final moments. Or was it something else? Was this not an act of violence, but a carefully planned disappearance, an escape? And if so, how? This was a time when escape meant braving the unforgiving bayou, dodging bounty hunters, surviving wild animals, and trusting no one but your own instinct. For an enslaved woman like Sarah, every odds was stacked against her. Yet still, she vanished. The plantation was shaken. The other enslaved people whispered. The overseers grew nervous. A woman had disappeared, and no one could explain how. Or why. And here's where the story twists. No one ever found her. Not alive. Not dead. She simply ceased to exist. But stories like this, they don't go away. They linger. And in the swamps of Louisiana, silence has a way of speaking louder than screams. Sarah, a common name, easy to forget, easy to erase. But the woman behind it? Anything but ordinary. We don't have photos. No diary entries. Not even her full name. What we do have are fragments, plantation logs, whispered oral histories, and the weight of absence. Sarah was listed among the enslaved on a mid-1800s Louisiana plantation. That's where the paper trail begins and ends. But behind the ink and numbers, there was a life. Sarah was known to be quiet, observant, and unusually sharp. Some said she could memorize a conversation word for word. Others remembered her way with herbs knowledge passed down through generations. She worked in and around the bathhouse, which, ironically, gave her a rare kind of privacy, brief moments alone. Out of sight from the fields or kitchen watch, she may have been in her 20s, possibly younger. Enslaved from birth or sold into the plantation system early, no one is sure. But what people are sure of is this: Sarah paid attention. She listened when no one thought she could hear. She noticed when patterns broke, when guards changed, when doors creaked at different times. There were rumors she had once tried to run before, caught, punished, but she never spoke of it. Not even to the few people she trusted. Why does this matter? Because Sarah wasn't just a name on a ledger. She was a strategist, a quiet rebel. And in a world built to crush resistance, her very awareness was dangerous. So when she vanished, some weren't surprised, they were in awe, because If anyone could have pulled off the impossible slipping through a locked door and into the wild unknown, it was her. That's exactly what we'll start to explore. Next, the brutal world she would have had to survive. If she really made it out to understand Sarah's disappearance, we need to understand the world she would have escaped into. The Louisiana Bayou wasn't just a backdrop, it was a living, breathing force. Dense, humid, and teeming with life that didn't care whether you were running from a master or running toward. Freedom. The land itself was a trap. Twisting waterways, knee-deep mud, venomous snakes, and alligators that lurked just beneath the surface. The trees grew thick and close, blotting out the sky. You could take 5 steps and lose your sense of direction completely. Maps meant nothing here. Compasses failed. The terrain was unforgiving even for those who knew it, and yet it was also a shield. For enslaved people, especially those born on or near the plantation, the bayou held secrets. Hiding spots. Escape routes whispered from one generation to the next. Folklore mixed with survival tactics, where to step, what plants you could eat, how to listen for danger in the stillness. But even with this knowledge, the risk was enormous. Bounty hunters patrolled the area with dogs trained to track scent through water. Mosquitoes carried deadly diseases. One wrong move could mean getting stuck literally or worse, getting caught and dragged back in chains. So when someone like Sarah vanished, people didn't assume it was magic. They assumed desperation, courage, or death, and yet the fact that no body was found, no scraps of clothing, no traces, that left something else hanging in the air. Possibility, because the bayou may have been brutal, but it had also swallowed secrets whole before. Could Sarah have been one of them? At first glance, the bathhouse might seem like the least suspicious place on the plantation. The space meant for cleaning, perhaps even quiet. But look closer and it becomes something else entirely. A place of routine, of vulnerability, of control. For enslaved women like Sarah, the bathhouse wasn't a sanctuary. It was a place where they were watched, inspected, and expected to perform unseen labor hauling water, scrubbing bodies, keeping everything spotless without ever being truly seen themselves. But that invisibility, it could cut both ways. Unlike the fields, where overseers barked orders in plain sight, the bathhouse was more contained, quieter, more predictable. Sarah would have known who came and went, and when. She would have known how long the place was left alone, where the shadows fell, where the floor creaked, where the window latches were loose. Think about that. A woman with no formal freedom, memorizing her surroundings like a blueprint. What if she wasn't just surviving in that space? What if she was studying it? It's also worth noting that bathhouses were places where the power dynamic was both heightened and oddly blurred. An enslaved woman might be attending to someone of status, yet still expected to remain invisible. That kind of closeness gave her access to overheard conversations, to routines, even to keys left unattended. And there's one detail people often forget. The bathhouse was locked from the outside, which means if Sarah vanished while it was locked, she either had help or found a way out that no one expected. A crack in the wood, a loose board, a hidden crawl space, something that had been there all along, just unnoticed. And maybe that's the heart of this whole mystery. Sarah saw what no one else did. Next, we'll dig into what the records actually say and how much of it might be myth. The trouble with stories like Sarah's is that they often live in two worlds: the historical record and the human memory. And in between those two, a fog of assumptions, silence, and selective truth. Here's what we do know. One morning, the bathhouse was found undisturbed, but Sarah was gone. The overseer documented her as missing, not escaped. That wording alone is strange. Escapes were punishable, recorded, chased, but missing? That left room for ambiguity. Maybe it was an attempt to avoid scrutiny. Maybe they didn't want to admit that a woman they considered property had outsmarted them. But the records end there. No follow-up entries. No recapture. No sale. No death. It's as if she stepped off the page and into legend. Then there's the folklore. Over the years, stories about Sarah shifted. Some said she was taken by spirits in the swamp. Others believed she transformed, became a ghost, or a creature who watched from the trees. A warning, or maybe a symbol, but let's pause. Why do stories like this become supernatural? Why does a woman escaping bondage become myth instead of memory? Maybe because the truth is more unsettling, that she got away, that she disappeared without help, without violence, without being seen, that someone the system saw as powerless became untouchable. That idea is dangerous. To the ones who held the power. So they let the record fade. Let the whispers twist. Turn the woman into a ghost, because that's easier to control than a real, living active rebellion. But there's more to this story than what's on paper or passed down in hushes. There are theories, clues, unlikely possibilities, and that's exactly what we'll explore next. Every possible path Sarah might have taken, from the believable to the bizarre. When someone vanishes without a trace, especially someone history was never meant to remember, what follows isn't always a search. Sometimes it's a story war, and with Sarah, there are plenty. Theory 1. She escaped into the bayou. This is the most grounded version. Sarah waited, planned, and used her knowledge of the plantation to slip away unnoticed. The bathhouse was isolated enough. Maybe she timed it with a storm, used the rising water to cover her tracks. She could have followed the hidden footpaths some enslaved people knew by heart. Could she have made it to a maroon community, those hidden settlements of escaped slaves deep in the swamp? It's possible. They existed and they protected their own. Theory 2, an inside job. What if Sarah didn't act alone? What if someone, another enslaved person, or even a sympathetic outsider helped her? Left the door unlocked? Provided a change of clothes? Covered for her after she disappeared? The plantation's silence in the records might hint that someone powerful wanted to keep it. Quiet. Theory 3, death in disguise. Some claim Sarah didn't escape but died trying. Her body swallowed by the swamp. Others believe she changed identities, cut her hair, took a new name, and blended into a free black community, far from the plantation's reach. Theory 4, the supernatural. It's the least plausible and yet the most repeated. They say she was taken by spirits of the bayou, that she never left because she became part of it. The whispers turned her into a warning, or a legend, or something else, but maybe the wildest theory of all, that Sarah was never meant to be remembered. And that's exactly why we should, because every possibility, no matter how far-fetched, points to one truth. Her disappearance shook something loose. Sarah wasn't the first, and she wasn't alone. Throughout the brutal history of slavery in the American South, enslaved women resisted in ways that were quiet, clever, and deeply courageous. Not all rebellion looked like open revolt. Sometimes resistance meant saying no, hiding food, faking illness, teaching their children to read in secret, slipping messages between clothes, or in Sarah's case, vanishing entirely. And those stories, they rarely made it into the official records. Why? Because resistance from women challenged the system twice over, not just the institution of slavery, but the patriarchal assumption that women were passive, fragile, and controllable. Sarah's disappearance may seem like a personal mystery, but it fits into a much larger pattern, one where enslaved women used the few tools they had to disrupt control. Their minds, their knowledge, their silence. Think about it. Sarah wasn't a warrior with a weapon. She was a woman with a memory, She noticed schedules, habits, weak points, and routine. She had access to water, supplies, spaces others didn't monitor. Her rebellion was in the planning, in the patience, and there were others. Women who burned crops, who poisoned their captors' food, who used lullabies to pass coded messages, who held entire lineages together under threat of separation, brutality, or death. Their resistance was generational. It was survival. It was legacy. And Sarah, whether she escaped or not, belongs to that legacy. She wasn't erased by accident. She was left out because her story didn't fit the narrative that enslaved women were helpless. But here we are, telling it anyway, because sometimes the quietest acts of defiance echo the loudest. Next, we go deeper. What if vanishing itself was the rebellion? In a world built on control, visibility is power. The enslaved were counted, inspected, watched, listed. Every move recorded. Every breath accounted for. Being seen was a form of surveillance, constant, dehumanizing, inescapable. So what happens when someone disappears? They break the system. Vanishing wasn't just escape, it was defiance. It was a refusal to be controlled, categorized, or claimed. And for many enslaved people, especially women like Sarah, it was the most radical thing they could do, because vanishing shattered the illusion that control was absolute, that everyone was accounted for, that the system was unbreakable. When someone like Sarah slipped through the cracks, no warning, no trace, it didn't just unsettle the masters. It scared them. It raised questions they didn't want to answer. What if others tried? What if their grasp wasn't as tight as they believed? What if the people they considered property had been watching, learning, waiting? Vanishing also created a silence that couldn't be explained away. No punishment to make an example of. No body to parade. No narrative to spin. Just absence. A hole where control used to be, and that silence, it was louder than rebellion. Sarah's story may have been erased from the record, but her disappearance forced people to remember her, precisely because they couldn't explain it. Whether she made it to freedom or perished in the attempt, she used invisibility as a final act of agency. She turned the system's greatest strength, its watchful eye, into a weakness, and that's what makes her story so powerful. But her disappearance didn't just disrupt authority. It echoed, it lingered, it haunted. Next, we'll follow those echoes into the swamp where legend, memory, and mystery blur together. The bayou doesn't just swallow bodies, it swallows stories. Too, Sarah's disappearance became part of the swamp's own rhythm. A whisper among the cypress trees and Spanish moss. For decades, locals passed down tales not just of a missing woman, but of a presence that seemed to linger, watching, waiting. Is it memory? Fear? Respect? Or something deeper? Some say you can still hear Sarah's footsteps in the misty dawn, soft, deliberate, fading before anyone can catch her. Others claim strange lights dance over the water, marking the places where the living and the dead meet. These aren't just ghost stories. They're cultural echoes, ways communities hold on to truths that official history won't tell. And in those stories lies a kind of power, a refusal to let Sarah be forgotten, a way of saying she was here. She mattered. The swamp itself became a symbol, a boundary between oppression and freedom, between life and the unknown. But the echoes go beyond folklore. They speak to the silence left by history's blind spots. They remind us that for every recorded fact, there are countless untold stories, lost lives that shape the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Sarah's story is part of that greater narrative. It's a call to listen not just to what's written, but to what's felt, remembered, and imagined. Because sometimes the loudest voices come from the quietest places. And sometimes The past speaks through silence. Sarah's story isn't just a tale from the past. It's a mirror held up to us today, a reminder of what history chooses to record and what it tries to erase. Her disappearance forces us to ask, who gets remembered? Who gets forgotten? And why? In a world still wrestling with the legacy of slavery, Sarah's silence speaks volumes. It challenges us to look beyond official records and recognize the courage hidden in absence, the bravery in vanishing, the power in reclaiming one's story. Even if only through whispers and legends, her story reminds us that resistance isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet acts, the ones that leave no mark but change everything, and it pushes us to honor the countless lives lost to history's blind spots. Women like Sarah, whose names we may never know, but whose spirit shaped the course of freedom. So, what can we learn from Sarah of Louisiana? Maybe this, that freedom isn't just about escape. It's about agency, about control over one's fate, about hope. Her story, mysterious and incomplete, offers a space to remember the humanity behind the history, to feel the fear, the courage, the pain, and the hope. Because when we listen closely, we hear more than a disappearance. We hear a life lived defiantly, and in that, there's a kind of justice. Thank you for joining this journey into a story that refuses to stay silent. If this moved you, please like, subscribe, and share so Sarah's story and those like hers aren't forgotten.